Heyo, so remember when I said I'd never be one of those YouTubers who rants about something they hate for a whole video? Yeah, we'll throw that out of the window. Today I'm gonna spend probably the next 10 minutes ranting about something I can't stand.
Guys, I'm literally shaking for no fucking reason. I was just misgendered by this person I was helping.
For once, I'm completely inclined to agree. One was indeed shaking for no reason. If anyone gets that upset over being misgendered, they obviously have a lot more to work on in themselves. For instance, I get called a man, or trans, or being accused of being 60 to 70 years old multiple times a week. And if I let things like that get to me, then I would never get anywhere in life.
And for some reason, I couldn't correct him. I don't know why.
If one wants to identify as a woman, take a moment to imagine what biological women have had to deal with since birth. And if being called the wrong gender upsets one that much, maybe one isn't strong enough to be a woman.
Every single time he called me man, I just didn't know what to say back.
Part of being a person and a woman is knowing how to stand up for oneself and learning what to say and when to say it and how to say it. Because if a person can't stand up for themselves, how exactly does that person expect to be able to advocate for anyone else?
Okay, I've met a lot of people who say things like, oh, why do pronouns matter? It doesn't affect me. Well, maybe it doesn't affect you, but, and I'm gonna hold your hand when I say this, not everyone is you. Honestly, I think I've seen more cis people get way more upset when you use the wrong pronouns than any trans or non-binary person I've met. The woman in this video even said that she doesn't understand why she was shaking. She knows that it's not a big deal in the grand scale because, yeah, the world will keep spinning. And she walked away with no bruises, but it still affected her to a point of getting a panic attack. If you don't get it, then that's fine. Not everyone has empathy. Her identifying as a woman doesn't hurt your own sense of womanhood. Unless, of course, your womanhood is built on insecurity. If womanhood is all about collective pain and whether you're strong enough to be a woman, what about the women who don't share the same experiences you have as a woman? What would happen if a man related to the issues you thought were solely women's issues? The answer would be that you just define your own identity, because a man nor anybody else should be able to define your womanhood. There are plenty of cis women who can't get pregnant. Are they not women anymore because they don't feel the pain of childbirth? What about the women who don't bleed? And the women who do, sometimes they don't get period cramps. Are they not a woman anymore? Do they lose their gender identity card just because they don't relate to a certain amount of women? Because plenty of cis women also get butthurt when they get mistaken for being not a woman. Because we are seen through the eyes of our gender. Because as someone who's been mistaken for a different gender, my safety changes based on what gender people think I am. For many, their gender is a sanctuary, whether it's boy, girl, both, or neither. There's a quiet comfort in being recognized and having the world reflect what you hold dear to yourself. But when that reflection is lost, when the people misread who you are, it stirs something deep in yourself. Some feel invisible, some feel angry, others feel an aching sense of sadness, as though their very essence is misunderstood. That's why something as simple as pronouns carries so much weight to people. What seems so trivial to one person is a lifeline to another. It is a mirror of their identity and a measure of your respect and the recognition of someone's truth. I've actually talked about my view on gender roles, and pronouns, and how I think they're all social constructs, and I don't hold my personal values to any of them. Despite my beliefs, I still believe it's necessary to have empathy. Narrow ideas about gender are harmful to everyone. Cis people are the only ones who decided that you're a woman unless someone else decides you're too good to be one. Remember that thing that happened with the Russian boxer, where she was so good that people thought she couldn't possibly be a cis woman? I love harassing a family man to the point of having to pull my daughter's birth certificate, a very private, sacred document for the family and government only, to prove his daughter was worthy enough to achieve something. My favorite hobby, honestly. Is it also hilarious when no one talks about F to M trans athletes when talking about trans people in sports? Mac Beggs is a trans male boxer who was forced to compete in the women's division because of the trans hate against trans women in women's sports. Mac won 2 state championships, and people were pissed because Mac is a man competing in the women's division. Patricia Manuel is a male boxer who won a groundbreaking fight against Hugo Alger, I am pronouncing that so wrong and I feel so bad, who is a cis man in 2018. Chris Moiser is a male runner who had won several competitions against his cis opponents in his categories and qualified for the US Olympics trials in the 50-kilometer race run in 2020. If you want to talk about biological advantages, why are different ethnicities allowed to compete in the same competition? If you are sour because you got beat by a trans athlete, it has nothing to do with your opponent and their biological advantages. It boils down to your transphobia. Athletes are not striving to be the best within their gender. They want to be known as the greatest of all time, no matter race, gender, or background. Excellence transcends identity. And in sports, that's the ultimate goal, to be known for what you can do, not for who people think you are. But I know for a fact that transphobic betas will never see it the way I do. I found this group on Facebook called Transvestigate, which is a great example of how people find your worth to be in your gender. Actors and actresses' awards and achievements are undermined because they have masculine shoulders and a feminine nose. I stumbled across this while researching for my conspiracy video. I wasn't gonna include it since I started getting a headache reading through it, but honestly, I just cannot talk about this absurdity. It's like watching the most paranoid people alive obsess over something that has absolutely zero impact on their lives. What if the history we are all given is all BS? I was on Story Rewind page reading the stories of remarkable women, and then I started to really look at these women. I could see the features were evenly distributed on squared skulls. So I downloaded and checked. I am deflated and irritated. Not one effing thing we have been told is true. Not one historical idol that is waved before us is genuine. The black man is C.J. Walker, seller of women's beauty products. The first image of CJ, the daughter, and the granddaughter, all of them are male. The white man is Clara Barton, a supposed Florence Nightingale type. Seriously, at this rate, I'm going to have to investigate that story too. By the way, these kinds of posts are everywhere in this group, where they take these skulls and line it up to people's faces, and the male skull is so funny to me because it just looks like the Chad face. You hear that, guys? If you don't look like a Chad, you're not a man. This is actually such a fucking dumb way to think. You think all history books are filled to the brim with lies because you incorrectly overlaid an outdated drawing of a female and male skull? Wow, babe, you're so enlightened. Be careful. The people who do gender switching operations on illegal aliens are coming for you. Like, this would be the same if I made a Facebook group called Car Paint Detective, and I just pull up pictures of cars that have been repainted, or actually not even repainted, but it seems like they were, and stream about it for 30 threads. Look, see, the paint is chipping here, and it's black underneath. Big machinery is lying to us. I actually don't want to talk about this specific thread for too long, since I'd just be bringing up the same fucking point over and over, which is, 1, they are not trans, because people can have masculine or feminine traits and still identify with whatever they were assigned at birth, and 2, trans folks deal with enough bullshit with something that should be irrelevant. Your fragile ego will survive. My partner asked me the other day, how many genders are there? Because we were talking about being woke. And my answer was that there was no number, because gender is a spectrum. Even if there were a number, the most common answer being 2, there are still an infinite amount of numbers between 1 and 2. There are people who are 1, there are others who are 2, but there are also others who are 1.5, or 1.15, or 1.1345. I know it's very weird to compare numbers, letters, and colors, shapes to gender, but it's just how I see it in my head, and how I make it logical. I think the idea of gender is fun, kind of like creating an OC. You're fully welcome to believe there's 58 genders, and you're fully welcome to believe there's 1. That also reminds me that when we're talking about trans or non-binary people, and how it's unnatural, and there's only a man and a woman, gender-affirming care isn't necessary. And then they always leave out intersex people. The moment people bring up biology and start whining about how they think non-binary or trans identities are silly, it's like billions of intersex people vanish from their minds. I've actually learned that there's millions of people who don't even know that intersex people exist because schools often forget about their existence too. It honestly makes sense that so many remain unaware because even the educational systems tend to sideline intersex realities, pushing the idea that gender and biology are strictly binary when nature itself shows how complex, cool, and unique gender can be. So, if you're upset that trans people are confusing your kids, it's not the trans community, and it's not drag queens. Would you believe me if I told you the reason why gender is so confusing is because of the tight gender boxes we get to have as kids? I'm sure every AFAB can agree that the color pink is shoved down our throats to the point that a lot of girls reject anything pink. Of course, we grow out of these phases, but have you ever stopped to think why all girls alike had a phase where we rejected girly things? It's because not every girl is the same, just like not every boy loves the color blue. When I was younger, I loved Monster High dolls, the color pink, Barbie girl games, fake makeup, and painting my nails. But my favorite memories included playing with mud pies, driving a tractor, throwing sport balls around, and my favorite toys were stuffed animals, which I believe are pretty gender neutral. Forcing people into these boxes are exactly what causes gender confusion in kids. It's not about who they truly are, it's about these rigid expectations society places on them. Unfortunately, some parents, whether transphobic or not, add on to this confusion when they find out their kid is not the gender they thought they were. I've noticed that a lot of transphobic parents often weaponize detransitioning videos to scare their kids away from exploring their trans identity, using someone else's experience to shut down their child's need for self-discovery because, oh my god, it's so scary to think you're one thing when you're actually not. That's not how teenagers work, obviously. It's like when super religious parents try to showcase scary images of goth girls and punk boys because the devil can scrape, even though the kids just wanted to dye their hair bright pink. Everyone deserves an embarrassing hair color era. Stop depriving your kid of a canon event. I never understood the big deal behind stopping your kid from being happy, even if they end up being wrong later. If calling your child a boy makes them happy in the moment, I don't see any harm in it. There's also a big majority of children who detransition not because they felt wrong, but because their environment didn't react in a safe way for them to continue to express themselves in the way they do. Because trying to convince your child they are wrong about something so personal doesn't work. Conversion therapy doesn't work. Religion doesn't work. God makes no mistakes, you say, so why would you assume your child is a mistake? Even if it's completely foreign to you and it makes you uncomfortable, you can consider it playing with your kid, like playing doctor. Are you gonna stop your kid from being a doctor because that's not the plan you had for them? No, because that's absurd, right? Then gender is exactly like that, because gender is not that deep. However, on the other side, there are parents who think they're being supportive but end up pushing their kids in the opposite direction. People who don't tell others their baby's gender when they have one is a little weird to me, because there is a reason you assign it a gender at birth, because other people need to perceive your child. You won't tell others what it says on your birth certificate, but you give your baby a name? Interesting. Do you not see the hypocrisy behind that? There's nothing wrong with naming your baby, just like there's nothing wrong with telling people your baby's gender. That's why it's called assigned at birth. It's completely possible to raise your kid to be gender neutral without leaving the people who surround your baby confused. Actually, some parents who are trying to be progressive will embrace their child's transition, but also strangely impose stereotype gender norms on them. Jerseys, video games, and sports for boys, pink clothes, makeups, and dolls for girls. These stereotypes can create just as much confusion as rejection does. It's not about letting your kids figure out who they are now, but now fitting them into a socially accepted narrative, whether they're cis, trans, or questioning. There also shouldn't be anything wrong with trans kids, in my opinion. I remember the first time I learned about trans people was a F to M trans classmate in middle school. It felt a bit weird calling them by another name when I learned their dead name first, but it wasn't too hard to pick up. They were a trans kid, and now they are a trans adult. They cut their hair and went on puberty blockers because hair grows back and puberty blockers are reversible. Trans kids are valid. I don't find it necessary to push away a child's identity simply because they're not old enough to transition, because soon they will be old enough. enough, and they will remember what you said. No sane person wants to perform gender surgeries on your kids. It is simply letting your kids be able to express themselves in a safe and accepting community. That's why I find phrases like stuck in the wrong body a bit weird. It reduces a deeply personal experience to something others can easily digest, but that's not always reflective on someone's journey, which is why binary trans people who don't want surgeries are also completely valid. Surgery is scary and extremely expensive, and if a trans person can be happy in their own body they were born with, that should be enough for everyone else around them too. The ultimate goal for trans progression should be letting trans people be happy. I remember my well-meaning friends telling me that I was born into the wrong body. Even though they were very liberal and open-minded, it still caused me gender dysphoria because I like my body as is, and hearing that phrase made me feel like I had to want something to change, to fit in someone else's understanding of being trans. I understand that it's supposed to put a common feeling into words that plenty of people can relate to and find solace in, but not all trans people feel that way. Not that I identify as trans or anything. My gender is up to interpretation, and I recently learned that's called apogender or agender, which is hilarious to say out loud. Like, hello, I am agender. Which gender? Exactly. I've heard some people consider me trans, even though I don't really consider myself that, just because I don't really staple myself to any gender label, period. I don't really call myself cis, same way I don't call myself trans. My ideology is that you are free to be trans, to be cis, to be non-binary, but also know you don't have to put your identity into words, nor feel pressured to explain it to anybody. The only person you owe an explanation to is yourself. When someone misgenders you, I hope you don't feel any shame because whatever people say won't ever define you as a person. Your gender identity should be an unshakable essence that belongs solely to you. I might want to talk about this subject later because I've been getting it so much on my feed and thoughts keep popping in my head, you know? But for now, that's it. Laters.